So, how did the Korean War alter the status, perception, and consideration of women and children in the societies of the two Koreas? So, in pre war Korean society, the duty of a woman to her husband or to the husband's family was absolute and unquestionable. So, respect and discipline was already expected, and only a man could obtain a divorce. And female submission persisted in Korean villages, mostly the rural countryside, until recent times, basically until the 1940s. And as you can see on the right, that's the highlighted Cheongcheong region, which is a conservative region. And there's a story of a high school married couple, and the husband died of sickness in the 1940s, and his bride committed suicide. And in their village, it was commemorated, and everyone respected the woman because of how much devotion she had. And on the bottom left, you can see a caricature done by a Korean artist for a newspaper. It's basically making fun of like the new woman in American society and in modern times. So traditional thoughts were very encouraged in Korean society. After becoming independent from Japan in 1945, Korea was now a liberal democracy, and women could pursue education, work, and other aspects of public life that they couldn't before. For example, education of women was seen in strictly female schools and universities that were made, and they began to engage in art, teaching, economics, and they contributed much society, especially in terms of GDP. This started, and the Korean War started in June 1950. The main groups that will be addressed to women and children during the Korean War, going in clockwise fashion, are the comfort women, biracial children, orphan children, and wives of American servicemen. From 1953 to 1960, about 500 Korean war brides arrived in the US annually, and in Korea and all in America, they were made fun of and degraded on both sides. And on the Korean side, they were ostracized by their relatives and neighbors for marrying non-Koreans. In the US, they encountered prejudice because people had stereotypes of Korean women who saw them as only prostitutes and maids. And when they were married to white and black Americans, most women couldn't really connect with the culture and didn't know much about the culture and had limited English skills. And so they lived isolated lives. And unfortunately, because of this, the marriages didn't last long. And because a lot of them came from lower class, rural backgrounds, they had limited education and limited skills they could offer to the American economy, and found it hard to support themselves and their family after their marriages had failed. Although these women were shamed on both sides, they became American citizens, and later they would sponsor the immigration. It would inspire the immigration of Korean family members and Korean individuals after the Immigration and Nationality Act in 1965 was passed. Another group that Korea still holds prejudice against today are biracial children. So this is a phenomenon that was created. They were fathered quote unquote, by American soldiers. And actually, the Korean government's Ministry of Social Affairs, a decade after the war, sent mostly mixed race children overseas for adoption instead of Korean children. And in a society that was extremely devoted to bloodlines and still is, for example, you have like dating apps off of your blood type and things like that. It's known for being extremely homogeneous. Bringing other races and cultures into the mix was seen extremely negative, and a lot of these children were actually left parentless at the end. But some of them were actually too old to go up for adoption. And on the right, you see a movie called Steel Helmet, which is about the Korean War, made in 1951. And this is basically about orphan who, that was his case, he was a little bit too old. He was fathered by a kind of crusty American soldier and said that his parents were with Buddha. According to the Korean Herald, the war left 10 million people separated from their families, 300,000 war widows, and 100,000 war orphans. And all these orphans were part of a huge influx of refugees that came to the US in the summer of 1950, and a series of these incidents kept going on throughout the war. And actually, the founder of the Holt International Foundation, which is an adoption agency, Harry Holt, said that their interest in Korean children was sparked, and a lot of Americans also, when there was an influx in these orphans during the Korean War. And as you see, there's a lot of widowed mothers, and actually, this is still looked down upon a lot in society. They're seen as like incompetent, irresponsible. How could you leave your husband? How could you not have a husband take care of your child? And actually, like when you go to schools and things like that, mothers who know and parents who know that a child in their class is taken care of by a single mother will not let their children talk to that child of the single mother. It just goes on in Korean society from then until now. So before we get into comfort women, a good thing to know is that in Korean society it was put down a lot because of the Confucian values that the society holds. So for example, Confucian values include group-oriented respect. So for example, in America you have all the emphasis placed on the individual, but in Korea it's all about the group. You make decisions for the better of the group. And respect, following the rules, and normalcy are all valued in Korea. And this has been holding the nation, the morals of the nation, the way of life, and social relations of Korea together since the Goryeo dynasty in 1392. The group that was possibly put down the most during the Korean War and still is today are comfort women, and they're essentially Korean women of all ages who are forced to provide sex services for members of the American Japanese military during the Korean War. And the U.S. government says that around 300,000 troops were sent to South Korea during the war, and for those 3 years during the Korean War, around 60% of all South Korean prostitutes worked near U.S. military camps. And as you can see in the top right hand corner, those are actually North Korean nurses that were captured to be comfort women. So both South and North Korean women were pressured, captured, and forced to service military men. And from New York Times article, the words of a 71-year-old woman capture the essence of a comfort woman. She says that, "I think that women like me were the biggest sacrifice for my country's alliance with the Americans. Looking back, I think my body was not mine, but the government's and the US military's." So comfort women were extremely looked down upon and were degraded in Korean society. For example, some of the most popular derogatory terms were Yankee princesses, Yankee whores, Western whores, UN madams, and the list goes on and on basically. And they were seen as having extremely low status, and if any status, in the 20th century. And not only did the modern society frown upon them, but even prostitutes regarded them as the lowest of the low, because in their eyes, they betrayed Korea. And children born to these American soldiers and Korean prostitutes were often abandoned and had the same kind of abuse. And once you hit the 70s, tens and thousands of children had been born to these comfort women, and they were the targets of racist abuse. For example, some other derogatory terms for the children were Western princess bastards, darkies, and it was difficult for South Korean prostitutes around the military bases to escape from the abuse from their society. So a lot of them, their only hope was to move to the U.S. and marry an American soldier. And there's still controversy going on between the U.S. and South Korea. For example, the U.S. says that hiring prostitutes is incompatible with their military core values. So people are very angry over that in the modern day. Some very courageous comfort women who are still living are fighting for their rights and for the injustice that was brought against them. So in the Korean newspaper Gyeonghang Shinmun, it said that there's a lawsuit going on that happened recently by 122 surviving comfort women who were seeking 10 million won or 9,500 US dollars about, and basically they said that the South Korean government infringed on their human rights and that they were controlled against their will. And this kind of brings up the issue in Korean society. And these women all hope that it stays relevant much longer and things like this never happen again. So going to the years after the war, from 1946 to 1976, around $12 billion in aid and 37,000 American troops were sent to South Korea. But this kind of produced an idea of Korean hypermasculinity and the need to be masculine in Korean culture, and also was said to watch out for female chastity and to keep women pure, probably due to the amount of prostitutes there were during the Korean War. And after the war, also, the Korea-Japan Basic Treaty in 1965 was signed, which was in the lower right-hand corner. And due to this, Korea became a military-sponsored developmental state for a very short amount of time. This caused impoverished rural women to seek employment as maids, houseworkers, factory girls, and sex workers.